Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Talk Gnosis. Tonight, we're going to be discussing Lent for Gnostics. Greetings, Bishop Peterson. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Bishop Canterbury?
Good. I think this is sometimes can be one of those kind of, I'm not going to say difficult subjects, but, one of those kind of catchy subjects, that Gnostics sometimes don't necessarily want to talk about, because I think some Gnostics kind of believe that Lent isn't necessarily a practice or a holiday for them. So why don't we just dive right into it? Lent, a lot of people say it's about beating oneself up, repenting. It's not very Gnostic. What's your thoughts about Lent?
Well, for me, it's whether you are the sort of Gnostic that believes that Jesus didn't really die on the cross, and therefore the whole bit about the crucifixion and resurrection doesn't really apply much to Gnostics, or whether you're more of an Orthodox Christian. I think that that there's something that happens at the end of Lent, at the very end of that period, and that is that a man is seized by the empire and tortured to death. And this is a horrific thing. Whether you believe that torture and execution was necessary for humanity's salvation or not, it was a horrific thing that has become part of our story. So the idea of taking a block of time to repent, for self-reflection, for self-discipline, for self-denial doesn't seem like a bad idea to me, regardless of where you stand on the issue of the crucifixion and the resurrection.
You know what? I think this kind of ties in a little bit, I think, to last week's episode, when we were talking about the idea of being kind of mindful and mindfulness.
Yeah.
And, to me, the idea of Lent isn't just necessarily giving up things, but it's also being very mindful of the things that you're experiencing in life. And yes, I think that can relate to, I'm going to give this up, I'm going to give this up, but it may also be creating a certain amount of quiet space and quiet time for oneself. Maybe starting some practices that one has either put on the back burner, that one has been promising oneself that one's going to be trying for a while, but I think now is kind of that perfect time for people to be doing these things. I would tell any of our Gnostic brethren who are watching this is that the big kind of metaphysical hermetic saying is know thyself, and what better way than to spend some time of reflection. And I think Lent is a perfect time for that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that when we talk about the notion of the Lenten discipline, we talked about incorporating a Lenten discipline. We even spoke about it last week with Bishop Mansfield. And the idea of choosing something or a few practices that we haven't tried before, choosing to deny ourselves something that we really like, can be an excellent opportunity for self-reflection. Are you looking for loopholes to get at that thing? How do you feel without that thing in your life? Or that practice or whatever it is that you've been doing? How does that feel? And when you can kind of take that time to reflect on these differences, you can get a much better idea of who you are. Why is it so difficult to give this up? Or why is it so difficult to say this extra prayer? What does this say about us? And I think you don't have to do it in a way you don't have to do yourself violence in the process. You can ask a question. It can become a line of inquiry. Okay, why is it so hard for me to give up wine? Why is it so hard for me to spend 40 days without a glass of wine? It's not necessary to my health. And it's not like I'm an alcoholic. It's just that I really enjoy this. But why is this so agonizing? And I think a person could actually take that line of inquiry and come up with some really good ideas about who that person is.
And I totally agree. Many times I will tell, friends, students, whatever, when it comes to the idea of Lent is, even besides giving things up, sometimes it's actually the addition of adding things
Yeah.
as well. Maybe that could be volunteering, some time every week. Make that as part of your spiritual practice, whether that is at a local animal shelter, whether that is at a hospice, whether it's visiting elderly at a nursing home, whether it's helping tutor maybe a child. Maybe you've got a good skill in math and your neighborhood's kids are bad at math and you can help them out. There's many ways
Yeah.
that I think, we can be given ourselves and to others. And I think, sometimes adding things in, again, maybe adding things like daily prayer, maybe even expressing once a week some form of gratitude, that maybe you've been looking to give gratitude to others who have helped you in your life, but you haven't really ever taken that time for that experience. But there are many ways, I think, that we can add things in besides just kind of subtracting things out during the Lent season.
Absolutely, because that becomes a new discipline. Incorporating that new thing that you've added as well, it's a whole other form of discipline and work, and I think that that's awesome. And I think particularly, if it is in a situation where you are in service to others, again, is an great opportunities for self-examination and reflection while also performing a very necessary service. So I think that that's incredibly important. The other thing that I would say for Gnostics is that if we as Gnostics understand that our conic forces shape our day-to-day lives, shape the laws that we live under, including political laws, governmental laws, and it was those laws and that kind of empire that resulted in the torture and death of Christ. What better way to honor Christ by putting ourselves in a situation where we can wake up a little? The more mindful we are, the more the opportunity we have for self-reflection, the more we encounter change, difficulty, the more aware we have to be. And if we're more aware, we are potentially more able to recognize our conic forces, the very forces that compel people to participate in political and social injustice, for example. So I think that that's crucially important. And I think that, again, whether it's denying yourself something or adding something or a combination of both, I think that can be incredibly important regardless of where you stand on certain theological issues.
Absolutely. Many times I'll get questions, where do I start? Well, I think starting is easy. Start maybe with some simple things. One of the first recommendations, and this may not be good since we are coming through social media and the electronic media, but I would tell many, is to maybe start cutting off the electronics for a while. Turn off the television, walk away from the computer, turn off the email.
There's an idea.
Put down the cell phone for a moment or two. No, but in all honesty, maybe say, hey, you know what? Every Friday or every Wednesday, I'm taking a vacation from my cell phone. Maybe on the weekends, take your weekends away from Facebook. Spend some type of maybe an electronic fast. I think that is a very good way to start. I think also another recommendation I would give to any of our listeners is, take this opportunity if one hasn't started. We're big on going through the Gospel of Thomas. We've been doing it now for one of our regular series. But whether it's taking a particular verse in the Gospel of Thomas or starting maybe reading some of the Gnostic Gospels, maybe set yourself a period of time every week that I'm going to take 10 minutes every Thursday morning before I go to work, and I'm going to read this many verses, and then when I get home at night, I'm going to take another 10 minutes and kind of reflect on what I read during the morning. Again, it's kind of getting oneself into kind of a routine of spiritual practice.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes those smaller changes can be tough, but they can also offer up, again, a real opportunity for exploration. And
Hmm.
when you talk about 10 minutes, I think that you're absolutely right. When we find that we are struggling to do that 10 minutes, when we have no problem spending 10 minutes on Facebook, that ought to trigger something in us too. And I speak myself, I'm just as guilty.
Hmm.
And ought to trigger something that says, wait a minute, why can't we spend 10 minutes on this task when we have no problem spending 10 minutes elsewhere? And this
Absolutely.
could be an opportunity for journaling as well.
Hmm.
And for folks in particular, if you don't have a spiritual director,
Hmm.
having that journal and being able to journal what you're doing, I think can be very helpful at this
Hmm.
time, because by writing it down and perhaps even reading it out loud afterwards, you
Hmm.
have the opportunity to better understand your process, your thought process, and how you're operating. And from there, perhaps eventually, you can make changes. But you oftentimes need to start with the self-knowledge, and this Lent offers that opportunity. Also, the great thing about it is you can say to people, "I'm giving it up for Lent."
Hmm.
So if people are asking, it's actually, there's a kind of a supportive atmosphere around you at that time. What I recommend doing is Ash Wednesday, go down to a local parish and get a nice big thick black cross on your head so people know that you're really serious. And then
Hmm.
if you want to incorporate these changes, you've got a time now where people understand that. And you can say, this is my Lenten practice.
Hmm.
And you may have a little bit less pressure on you, whatever it is that you're trying to work on to ignore that practice. So I definitely recommend this season for that reason. You can get support.
One thing I do want to point out is that even though, of course, myself associate myself as a Christian Gnostic, I have many friends from a variety of different traditions, some of them pagan, who may not say, well, I don't necessarily want to follow a Lenten practice. And, my argument to them is kind of the idea of spiritual self-sacrifice.
Hmm.
Isn't something that is exclusive to Christianity. And one of the ones I love to point out, because I've got a great love of many things Germanic, and especially of Viking mythology and of the Elder Edda, is kind of the idea of the quality of Odin, which is this sacrifice of self to self.
Yes.
His own initiation. I know that I hung on the windswept tree for 9 full nights, wounded with the spear, given Odin to myself, on a tree from which none of which roots it rises.
And he
To
took up the
me,
runes screaming.
yeah, absolutely. You
He
know,
got that Gnosis screaming in
yeah.
agony, and it's one of the most profound passages in all of religious literature, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you 110% on that one. This idea of kind of sacrificing self to self, this idea of the self-sacrifice, isn't just a Christian principle. I think we can trace this into many religions. We can trace it back into earlier Jewish mysticism. We can see it. In Native American culture. We can see it all over the world. So, Lent is, kind of a time of this beginning of spring, and spring is always this time of rebirth. And I would tell people, use that as your reflection if one isn't necessarily attuned to necessarily a Christian form of gnosis.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, the notion, I think, that passage from the Eddas is perfect. It's giving up self to self. Some people would talk
Hmm.
about the lower self and the higher self. It's
Hmm.
like, look, folks, there's more to you than what you think there is, and
Hmm.
there can be somebody in you who is far above that which is dragging you down, and
Hmm.
this is an opportunity to sacrifice that lower self to becoming that person that you can be.
Hmm.
And this is, as I said, this is a supportive time for that. It's an important time. That we're at the beginning of the year.
Hmm.
The holidays are over. You've gotten a chance to calm down a bit. but it's still the beginning of the year, and we're coming into springtide. We're coming into that spring season. There's renewal. Everything is rooting for you at this time. Everything is rooting for you at this time. So go for it. This is just a wonderful time for change.
And, again, I want to, just kind of express to our listeners and our viewers, take this time as kind of this, I think, period of reconciling various qualities within oneself. Make it about oneself here. I think even in the Gospel of Thomas, we've talked about this, but the idea of making the two into one when you make the inner as the outer. These things happen within oneself and only through these forms of self-reflection. But I think we're going to have to continue this interesting discussion into our Talk Gnosis After Dark.
Yes, we will, and I'm sure it's going to be a great conversation. Our conversations on After Dark always are. And for those of you who are interested in the After Dark episodes, they usually come out on Sunday nights, and they're on Stitcher, they're on iTunes. You can find them at the Gnostic Wisdom Network website, and on our Facebook page as well. So be looking for that on Sunday night, and I'm sure it's going to be a great show. We do have an audience question, and can you tell us, our audience, tell us about your Lent traditions. Are you giving something up for Lent? Are you adding something to Lent? Are you going to do a specific spiritual discipline? Leave it in the comments below this episode, and we'd love to hear about it. You can also go over to our Facebook group and make your comments there, and we can have a discussion as well. Also, we do have some news. Frater Ashen Chasen, who has been a guest on our show, is a remarkable ceremonial magician, and his book, Gateways Through Stone and Circle, is now available in paperback. You can go on Amazon and order it. Now, they're having a bit of a technical glitch, so it's showing up as not being in stock. You can go ahead and order it, and it should be available within a few days. And they won't charge your card until the order ships, just so you're aware of that. But you can get your order in now. And I know it's going to be a remarkable book, and I'm really looking forward to reading it myself. So wanted to make you all aware of that. One more thing, we're going to be coming up on Talk Gnosis, a very special guest. Dylan Burns is going to be on our show discussing the Sethians. He's a remarkable scholar who is taking a new perspective on the Sethians, and he'll be discussing his work on our next show. So stay tuned for that one.
That should be a fantastic one. And that is it, everyone. We will see you next week. So good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
This has been a production of the Gnostic Wisdom Network. For more information about this and all of GWN's programming, please visit gnosticwisdom.net. The opinions expressed in this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of GWN, the Apostolic Johannite Church, or any other organization. This has been released under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 International License and is brought to you by the generous support of our patrons. To support our programs and become a patron, please visit patreon.supportofourpatrons. To support our programs and become a patron, please visit patreon.com/Gnostic. That's patreon.com/GNOSTIC.